Taoism is a cult. I mean, speaking of religion for that period, I mean, the word religion doesn't really apply to that early period. By religion, I mean a system of rules to follow, observances, and things like that. So I use the term cult. So Yahwism is a cultic system where the head of the pantheon, the main deity is, but not the only one, is Yahweh or Yahu as they wrote it. And so that is really the simplest definition is simply people who adhere as their main ethnic deity to the deity known as Yah or Yahweh. That's really the simplest definition, and it's a pretty good definition because there wasn't really a lot more to it at the time. Okay, I'm putting the biblical image of that period aside from now. I'm talking purely from a historical perspective or archaeological perspective and things like that. And so the Yahwism at the time was simply people who had their main ethnic deity, but I'm stressing that the main deity, not the exclusive deity, main deity Yahweh. But they certainly believed in other deities as well, in local deities, in imperial deities, and things like that. They certainly believed that these other powers, supernatural powers, have power over their own lives. And so Yahwism is really just a form of cultic adherence to the deity known as Yah, but with no specific observances and things like that. Now, what's interesting, many scholars and certainly many lay people who are interested believe that Yahwism morphed into Judaism later on, became more specialized, became adopted the features that we now associate with Judaism, and that's not the case. Yahwism kind of spawned Judaism off, okay, and by extension also Christianity and other Samaritanism and things like that. But Yahwism continued full force at least until the fall of the Roman Empire. So, in fact, what is absolutely fascinating, and it's another book I'm working on, is that if we were to travel back in time, 2,000 years or even less, even 1,700 years or so, um, to the Roman Empire, and wanted to know what is the form of Yahwism that is most popular, most well known, it wouldn't be Judaism or Christianity; it would be Yahwism. And we see that in many thousands of amulets and magical items and things like that, medallions all across the Roman Empire, where Yao in the Greek, okay, Iota, Omega, yeah, exactly, with Alpha Omega.
I run into this a lot, and it's a big topic on my channel. So yes, please.
But that is a form of Yahwism because the head of the pantheon is Yah, and that continued alongside Christianity, alongside Judaism for centuries. Of course, in your channel, I assume that you have that. You see that a lot in your channel. And if we're talking on the so-called Gnosticism, which is a term that I don't like, it's not a scientific term to call it Gnosticism. That's not how they identify.
I've established that a million times. It's a umbrella term. It's like, yeah, it's
Your viewers are familiar. Yeah, great. So Gnosticism, in a sense, is an outgrowth also of Yahwism, an expression of Yahwism as well. There's a big discussion, as you probably know, whether Gnosticism has any Jewish roots in it, or is it only a Christian phenomenon. Actually, in reality, it's neither. It's just a continuation of Yahwism over the centuries. Yahwism simply was the greater force in the kind of cultic community that worshipped Yah. It started much earlier, continued while Judaism was being developed, and Christianity, and continued until at least the fall of the Roman Empire. But we can also, in a sense, it continues to this day. So, for example, in Kabbalah and things like that, it continues in a sense. Yahwism continues to this day. I'm sure we won't have time to get into that, uh, but that is the fundamental form of early Judaism. What will be? I mean, again, early Judaism is not the correct term, but what will also spawn off Judaism later on.
Okay, so there's a few different directions that I want to go based.
Just before we do that, excuse me, I just want to make sure something clear. It's not my book. It's an edited book, so it has a lot of different authors in it. I just edited, and I have also a chapter in that book. But I edited together with Professor Reinhard Kratz from Göttingen University. So it's not just me.
Well, even better, more expertise and more opinions. I love it. I always love books like that, or papers that are have multiple people involved. Those are good stuff to read.
Yeah, we have really, I mean, top leading scholars. Conrad Schmidt, Margarita Vollmer, Tony Holm of Penn State University, Stefan Schorsch, and many, many others. Karl Vanderton, of course, Reinhard Kratz as well. So you really, in this book, you have truly the leading scholars in the field coming together. We initially it was a conference that I organized at the University of Haifa at the end in December of 22, and the book came as a result of that. It's not a proceedings book. It's not just a list of just a collection of the papers that were presented. These are papers that grew out of our interactions at the conference. The conference was kind of a workshop, and we interacted a lot during the conference and even later on to think together through all of these issues that concern the Achaemenid Empire and the Yahwists at that time to produce this volume. Okay, so it's I mean, of course, I'm biased in a sense, but it is a truly a groundbreaking book.
We all have our biases, but no, I can't wait to read this. So okay, so here's the two things that I want to get into. One of them is elephantine. Another one is that you mentioned this Yahoo, this three-letter Yahoo or Yahoo, and in the Greek. So I actually have a screenshot that I had prepared, and it's from what we found in Qumran. I think Qumran. I believe, yeah, Qumran. Okay, and this is predates all these church Septuagints, the Codex Vaticanus, the Codex Sinaiticus, the Codex Alexandricus, and it shows you right there in Deuteronomy. I think is this Deuteronomy.
Leviticus.
Leviticus, yes, thank you for correcting me. Right there in Leviticus, you have the name Yahweh, and so there's that. You also have in Aramaic, you have Yahoo on these coins, and this is Persian period, I believe. Um, and so there's three letters, and we're all used to the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of Yahweh, or we don't even know how it's pronounced actually, just kind of guess. Some say Jehovah. If that's all totally more modern way to say it, but I'm wondering what, because there's a lot of theories on this name. Now, there are some who points out Diodorus of Sicily says this is the name of Dionysus. Um, there's actually a text in the Chaldean oracles. I actually screenshotted it. It's the English translation, but it's the Thomas Taylor translation of the Chaldean oracles. And he says, and right here I circled it, and I'll read it out just in case you can't see it. He says Dionysus or Bacchus was called by the Chaldeans Yahweh instead of the intelligible light. In the Phoenician tongue, he is frequently called Sabaoth, such as he who is above the seven poles, Demiurgus. What are your? Are they wrong? Oh, and then one more thing I wanted to point out: Plutarch in the early 2nd century also says that Yahweh, or the question in his text is called, "Who is the God worshipped by the Jews?" It's one of these dialogues that he puts together with Ammonius and a couple other people that he's with. I forgot their names, but there's a whole list of them. And he's like, "Who is this God that the Jews are worshiping?" He goes, "It looks like to be like either Adonis or Dionysus." And he gives a bunch of really good arguments of like the similarities between the ways the priests and the Eleusinian mysteries dress. They have the same colors, they have the same tassels hanging down, they play the same flutes, they do psalms, all this stuff. I'm like, whoa, this is actually a really. I was expecting to hear a really like kind of a weak argument of why they think that, but it was Plutarch lays it out, and I'm like, I wonder what scholars think about this, and you don't hear about it a lot. Now you've been digging into this from the expert, from your expertise, from a scholarly position, looking at the facts. How do we sort this out?
So two things. I mean, first of all, that's really appeared much later than the book that we're talking about. So and so I will talk about this very quickly, but then I'd like to refocus our discussion on the Achaemenid period. But I mean, the points that you're making are important and interesting, and of course, very apropos as well to the development of Yahwism. You did not mention also Macrobius.
That's later. I didn't want to go too late.
Well, but it's the same. It's exactly the same vein. I mean, we are talking later, but Macrobius, you're right. It's later, but the way I mean, and he's actually quoting a text from the second century.
Yeah, it's right
And
here,
so,
right here.
yeah,
He
right,
says
right.
he says this Yad Ya'o. I'll read it out for people so we can all be on the same page. He says, the Orpheans calling Eubolia good counsel point to this God having been provided for. If the plans of the mind are born of conception, the authors think that the mind of the world is the sun, from which the principle of understanding flows into men. They believe that the sun stood before the merit of good plan. Orpheus clearly pronounces that the sun in this free verse. And then it says in Greek, Helios on Dionysus, Epiklesin, Keleusian. And then he says under that right underneath that, he says one Zeus, one Hades, one Helios, one Dionysus, and then this is the part that you're getting into. He actually names this syncretic god Yahweh, the three letters that we just talked about, and he cites this oracle of Apollo Clarius. He's basically saying that this god is like the supreme god. Okay, so now we're getting later in time, but as you mentioned, he's citing earlier sources. This is something that I've been talking about on my channel for a while. So all right, now we have everyone on the same page. Now,
Now, this actually goes back to the point I was making. Yahwism continued. This is an evolution of Yahwism, and
okay, last thing, the Greek magical papyri. Yahweh
absolutely
is all over the place.
all
He's
over
like
the place.
every
Absolutely,
single passage.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
And that's why I'm saying if we were to go back in time, 1700 or even 1600 years back, or of course 2000 years back, and we wanted to know what is the most popular form of Yahwism of the deity Yah. Where is this deity being most kind of worshipped, or for lack of a better term, it would not be in Judaism or in Christianity. It would be much more, it not only were Yahwists in a sense very popular. Now, the reason I'm saying in a sense is that nothing was exclusive at that time. You could believe in your magic amulets and texts and things like that, and curse text, that Yao is going to protect you, but at the same time go and offer sacrifices to Mithra, and or to the Roman emperor, or to or different deities, etc. So nothing was absolutely exclusive. And also Jews and Christians also had moments where they went in and became Yahwists for a while, at least in terms of curses and magic formulae. So Yahwism was always there, not in the background, but in the foreground, in terms and it was an extremely popular. I mean, Yahwism was extremely popular also across the empire. Now, this also helps to explain, because the Roman Empire was at a point where in the fourth century, where it was almost, it kind of had, it would have gone either with Mithraism or Christianity.
and what and let me guess what you're about to say. I have to. This is so exciting because this is something that I've really been. I went into this evidence kind of blindly, just kind of leading see where it takes me, and I came to the conclusion that like this explains the rise of Christianity in a way.
Right. Exactly. This is what made Christianity a lot more palpable to the Romans, and this is why the early church fathers, had to combat the remnants of Yahwism all over the empire, right? So that's what they wrote against, what we call the Gnostics. In a sense, the Gnostics are simply Yahwists, okay? And so the, or what they call Gnostics, again, this term is so misleading, but all of the different sects, the Sethians, etc., all of these different forms of Yahwism are simply forms of Yahwism.
A lot of them call themselves Magus too. You hear that Simon Magus, Marcus Magus. So there's some sort of Persian stuff going on here, which is what we're going to get.
Well, the Magus. So Magus. Now we're starting to go back to the Persian context, and I'd like to continue with that. But Magus. In the Greek sources, there were several major people who were called Magus, and one of them was Moses.
Wow,
So one of them, they considered Moses to be a Magus as well in several Greek sources. Yep.
that's
And so,
fascinating.
yeah, they considered Moses was. What's really interesting about Moses, about the figure of Moses, is if we were to go back even further back in time to the third century, and even the early second century BCE, but mainly in the third century, and even late fourth, so late fourth to the early second. And what we wanted to know what people think of Moses, we would get at least five completely different stories.
You got Hecates of Abdera, right? Hecates of Abdera is probably the first
That's
person you
right.
ever.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's one of the sources. Absolutely. Moses was seen as this military leader who defeated the Ethiopians, or one that defeated other Nubian tribes, or a magush, an alchemist, and it has echoes in the Bible. How Moses was an alchemist, and was able to do all these to make nature do what he wanted. But also that Moses was the teacher of Orpheus, because he was.
I've been all over that verse because I want people to look, guys. These Alexandrians, these Jews in Alexandria, they're calling themselves Orphics. Basically,
That's
they're
right.
saying
Yeah.
Musaeus, this guy from Athens, is the same as Moses, and there's all. So tell us about that, and then let's get back to the Persians.
Yeah, I mean that's just typical kind of popular etymology. In Greek, Moseus sounds like it's the muse, the muses, and so you hear that, and you're like, yeah, that's the teacher of Orpheus. He was also seen, as I said, as a magush, as an alchemist, as someone who can bend the rules of nature according to his will. And so, yeah, and so that also shows that the story of Moses and who that was not decided even in the third century BCE. Okay, there was no canonical version. What's interesting in these versions of Moses is that they are not polemic. They're not even debating other versions. They're not trying to show how their version is correct and like the biblical version is wrong. They're simply ignorant. They don't know of the biblical version.
Right. That's another important thing. Is like this Moses is completely different than we think of today.
That's right. Well, it's not. That's what's interesting is it's not completely different. The Bible shows, I think, took all of these images of Moses that were already current in the region, in Ptolemaic, in the Ptolemaic regions, and is the Bible is polemic with those versions. So it takes elements. We do see elements, for example, of Moses doing supernatural things, parting the seas, all of the and tossing the rods, and they become so we do see elements that were popular in the Greek culture being adopted by the biblical authors, but we don't see the other way around. The earlier sources are not arguing; they are simply unfamiliar with the biblical sources.
They present him as sort of like a superhero magus character who's
Correct. Yeah.
doing a bunch of magic, and he's kind of a hero type, typical of Hellenism, Hellenistic
Absolutely. Yeah.
hero character. Um, and it's okay, that is fascinating. You got this Musaeus character in Athens, and then there's Moses down in Alexandria, and they're sort of trying to figure out. They're trying to figure out if it's the same person or not. Orpheus also, and in the James Charlesworth Pseudepigrapha, there's a whole chapter on Orphica text that are these Jewish Orphica texts. And look at what Orpheus is. He's a psalmist. He's playing music on a harp, and it's theological music. He's called theologian. That's where that word comes from. The first time people ever use the word theologian is for Orpheus, and some of his texts are referred to as apocalypses, revelations. So a lot of the same technical terminology we're seeing for Judeo-Christianity, we're seeing in these Orphics in Alexandria.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. What's interesting is also even in the second century, the Exagogue of Ezekiel. If I'm assuming you're familiar with that. That's a play, a Greek play that was written in Alexandria, probably performed in Alexandria, where a Jewish author that is completely Hellenized. I mean, he writes perfect.
Tragedian, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. He's Ezekiel the tragedian, and even his version of Moses in the second century, so relatively late second century BCE, is not exactly the biblical version. It's also kind of a mishmash. He is familiar now with the biblical version, and he is dealing with it, or at least a version that is very close to what we know from the Bible. But even in the second century in Alexandria, second century BCE, that's the story of Moses was still not completely canonized. Was not completely did not reach the form that we are familiar today.